Does the environment shape the person, or is it genetics? That's a very interesting question. I think I lean more towards the environment shaping people, although I will admit that a person's genetics does have a bearing. But if a person is raised in a loving environment, an encouraging environment, or even if a person comes out of adversity and they have a lot of mentors around them or just people around them that encourage them to do things, that positive environment around them, or maybe just one or two encouraging people, can cause people to rise above what somebody might think that the person could do. I think one of our modern day excellent examples is Dr. Ben Carson, who's one of my heroes. His environment was very meager in the beginning, and his dad wasn't even present in the home. But yet, due to the positive influence and the strength of his mother, he became a world-renowned surgeon, neurosurgeon, who has done outstanding work. So his environment helped him to go forward. But of course, he obviously had the genetic capability to be able to have the intelligence to become a surgeon. But I think that the environment weighs much heavier. There are people that have great abilities, and yet sometimes they don't get things accomplished. A lot of times you can hear people have great or high IQs, and yet you may never see anything really come out of them. So they had the genetic capability, but why didn't they produce? And I think it's the environment. So I'm more of a person that believes that an environment predominantly makes a person, and that one or two encouraging words from a mentor can help a person tremendously. It's really important that people can take a look at my book and they can see the history. My parents hailed from North Carolina. My dad was from Southern Pines and my mother was from Mooresville. And their parents were right in the aftermath of the Civil War. And of course, all of their growing up, they were greatly affected by what happened in the Civil War. So if we go backwards and we look at Reconstruction, it was originally designed so that those states who had separated from the Union, the Confederate states, could be brought back in, so the blacks would be able to gain freedom, where before they were told what they had to do, where they could live. And so Reconstruction was formulated from folks in the government, and since the Union won the war, it was in the government, and they were trying to implement this. So the ideas of Reconstruction were very, very lofty, and they were good ideas. The problem is, in the South, they considered the Civil War the war of Northern aggression. So there were problems with the implementation of Reconstruction. So when you had people that came from the North and they were trying to make Reconstruction happen, there were problems. So some of the positive things that happened during Reconstruction is that this was the first time that the former slaves, the blacks, started to take part in the political landscape. They took part in the political landscape of the South. Many were elected to local officers. In South Carolina, there were 2 lieutenant governors that were elected who were black in 1870, 1872. There were 20 blacks who were members of the House of Representatives, and there were 2 who were in the Senate. People think that we only have election problems today. Well, back in 1877, there was a presidential election that had problems that spurred what we call the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. And so we had Hayes and Tilden who were the presidents, and there was some question, or they were running for president, and there was some question over who actually won. And so a compromise was made where the Democrats told the Republicans that they could have the presidency if the troops who were in the South to make Reconstruction happen would leave. So the last vestiges of troops, Union troops that were in the South, left, and Rutherford B. Hayes became the President of the United States. There were promises made that would be kept when the troops left. Well, of course, when they left, those promises weren't kept. And if you think about in the past of what spurred on the two parties, the Republican Party was the party of freedom. It was the party of Lincoln. It was the party of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Democrat Party was the party that fostered slavery and wanted to keep the blacks enslaved. And so there were totally two different viewpoints. So now when you come to the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, as soon as the Union troops left, then the promises were broken and certain things returned to the South, like the black codes, the Jim Crow laws, and all of a sudden the political gains that blacks had made during this time period began to be quickly reversed. And they started not being able to hold political office. And pretty soon there was a lot of subjugation there. So Reconstruction, did it work? It had lofty ideas, but in the final analysis, it did not work. It did not enable the freed blacks who were formerly slaves to fully gain citizenship in the United States. A family of strong personalities. I would definitely say that my family had strong personalities. Now, we were not a large family. It was my mother, father, and my sister and I was the youngest. I was the baby, and my sister was 4 years older. But there were definitely strong personalities. Though, when you grow up, a lot of times things aren't easy, and I wouldn't necessarily say growing up was easy. But in a family of strong personalities, I had parents who would hold me accountable. And my sister would definitely debate me on ideas that I had, because a lot of times we had differing ideas. So being in that family of strong personalities helped to form who I was. It helped me to hold my ground. It helped me to understand that I was accountable for what I said and what I did. And I would have to say that my mother was definitely a very strong personality. As an aside, what I think that would be interesting to note was when I was in high school, I lived in Bangkok, Thailand, and I actually was there from half of sixth grade through graduation of high school. And during that time period, my father was in Vietnam working for USAID, or the Agency for International, the U.S. Agency for International Development. So he was an educator, and he was helping build schools. He was helping staff schools. So that resulted in me only seeing him once a month, because he would be in Vietnam for most of the month, and then he would come to Bangkok, Thailand, where we were living because of the war that was going on there at the time, and we would only see him for a week. So that caused my mother to have to be mother and father, and I wouldn't wish that on any woman, especially for me as a high-spirited teenager. But it was my mom's strong personality that forged me. If you can kind of think of a blacksmith with a forge, and my mom with the hammer, and I'm the sword, and she's banging on it or whatever. But my mom made sure that I came out with a strong character, and that I was a person that took responsibilities for my action. So I believe that growing up in a strong family was extremely beneficial to helping me become successful later on in life. Discrimination is something that has definitely been in our country from its inception. Although there are a lot of people that would claim that today not much has changed, but a tremendous amount has changed. I can remember when my parents shared with me just a few of the experiences that happened when they were much younger, when they were living in the South, which of course was mainly run by members of the Democrat Party. And of course, that was the area where the Jim Crow laws were implemented. So my parents growing up were in the aftermath of that. And I remember one time my mother talked about an accident that had occurred, and my mother was an RN, she was a nurse. But of course at this time she was just a young teenager. But there was an accident at the time and an ambulance showed up, and when the people in the ambulance realized that there were only black people in the accident, they left and they didn't render any help. So there were places where bathrooms were segregated. I remember in the Pentagon that there was a purple water fountain in one of the basements of the Pentagon, and we would actually get directions as to offices we needed to go from the purple water fountain. And of course that water fountain was a holdover from the time when the blacks, or coloreds as they were called at the time, were not allowed to drink from water fountains that weren't purple. But it was during the Bill Clinton presidency that the purple water fountain kind of disappeared. But it was a reminder of what had happened before. Well, we've come a long way since then. A lot of people forget that slavery and subjugation has been propagated all throughout the world. And in many different countries, there's been segregation. Unfortunately today, the modern day slavery would be human trafficking, which is one reason why we need to take care of our border, because that fosters that. And you have many folks in the Arab world still that are definitely folks that foster that. And of course, they were pretty important middlemen way back in slavery when blacks were being taken out of Africa and brought to the United States. So it is a part of our history. But with the civil rights era coming and us coming forward, we have made great strides. I was in Thailand and I was visiting a friend of mine. And in Thailand, a lot of us had houses that we rented. And so his landlord had a few properties on the street where he lived. And one of the properties had a pool. So because he was renting from his landlord, he had privileges to swim in the pool. So my friend and I were swimming in the pool one day, and the landlord's wife came over while we were swimming in the pool, and she whispered in his ear, and he kind of had a furrowed look on his face. He looked up at her, and then he swam over to me and said, "Tony, we need to go." So when we left, we walked down from the pool house to where his house was, and he talked to his mother for a little bit, and then she came out and said that she was very, very sad that we had to leave the pool at that time, and that she was going to come over to my house and have a talk with my mother and I that evening. So my friend was storming around, and I kind of really didn't get a full feel of what was going on, but he was pretty upset. So later on that evening, when she came to the house, we had a discussion, and she explained that the landlord's wife was showing the house, which was empty, to an American family. And she was concerned that since the American family was white, that if they saw me swimming in the pool, that they might not want to rent the house. And she said that after she had talked, the landlord's wife, had talked to my friend and we had left the pool, that a few hours later, the landlord's wife came over to their house and was in tears and was very apologetic for what she did. So my friend's mom explained that, unfortunately in our country, we have a history of where there's prejudice, and different things like that. But a lot of people and the majority of Americans don't adhere to that. And that she wanted to personally apologize for what happened to her son and I earlier that day. And then we had a more in-depth discussion about what racial prejudice was and how it manifested itself. And so that was a personal experience that I had. And although I wasn't excited about getting out of the pool, I was encouraged more so later in life when I look back on it as to the care that was taken by my friend's mother and how she thought it was important to come over and talk to my mom and I to resolve the situation. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you get a chance to read my new book, American Values. And please sign up for my newsletter, The American Grand Strategy.